Every school has its secrets, but in this particular high school, the secret was a single locked classroom on the third floor. Students walked past it every day. The chipped wooden door with its old brass handle and a faded Room 3B plaque. Nobody ever saw anyone go inside. Teachers always had the same explanation: it's under renovation. Unsafe. But the thing was, no repairs had ever been made. No construction crews, no fresh paint, no sound of hammers or drills. For years, the door just stayed shut. A group of seniors, Jake, Melissa, and Aaron, decided one late afternoon to find out what was really inside. The hallways were empty, lockers shut, and the fading light of the setting sun cast long shadows across the floor. Melissa hesitated. "What if we get caught?" she whispered. Jake grinned, holding up a pair of scissors. "Then we say we got lost." "Come on, don't tell me you aren't curious." The lock was old, and within a minute, it gave way with a loud snap. The door creaked open, releasing a stale gust of air that smelled of mildew and dust, like a basement that hadn't been touched in decades. Inside, the classroom was frozen in time. Desks stood in uneven rows, covered in dust. A blackboard stretched across the far wall, faint white chalk marks still visible. But they weren't words. They looked like scratches, carved over and over deep into the surface. Aaron's voice shook. "Guys, these look like names." He was right. Dozens of names, etched so violently the chalkboard had grooves. Jake wiped the dust off one and froze. The last name carved into the board matched his: Jake Miller. Melissa's breath quickened. That's not funny." On the floor, half buried under broken chalk, lay an old attendance book. Its pages were yellowed, the ink faded. They flipped through it in silence, until Melissa noticed something chilling. Every page ended the same way, with the same date, exactly 22 years earlier. Dozens of student names, all ending on that day. Suddenly, the door slammed shut behind them. They spun around, but no one was there. The sound echoed through the classroom, vibrating in their chests. The air grew heavier, like the oxygen itself was being pulled away. On the board, chalk lifted and began to move by itself, screeching against the surface. Slowly, painfully, it spelled out new letters. The three of them stood paralyzed as their names, Jake, Melissa, Aaron, were added to the list. Melissa screamed and rushed to the door, pulling with all her strength. It wouldn't budge. Aaron banged on it with his fists, his voice cracking as he yelled for help. Jake, wide-eyed, could only stare at the board as the chalk dropped, rolling to the floor with a hollow clatter. Then the classroom went cold. Not just chilly, the kind of cold that cuts through bone, the kind that makes your breath fog in front of you. In the reflection of the dusty window, Melissa swore she saw rows of figures sitting at the desks, silent, unmoving, their hollow eyes fixed on her. The door finally burst open. The hallway lights flickered violently, and the three of them stumbled out, coughing, gasping for air. When they turned back, the door to Room 3B was locked again, as if it had never been opened. The next morning, they tried to tell their friends, but when they went back up to the third floor, there was no Room 3B, just smooth, painted wall, with no sign a door had ever been there. And yet, when Jake checked his backpack later that day, buried under his books was the attendance register. The last page had fresh ink, 3 new names. There are rumors about certain classrooms that feel different. For Eastbridge High, it was room 209. Officially, it was locked because of water damage on the ceiling. But students whispered about something else, about strange noises at night, about a shadow that sometimes appeared in the window when the building was empty. One evening, two juniors, Emily and Ryan, stayed late for a group project. The rest of the school was already dark, the hall silent except for the hum of the old fluorescent lights. On their way out, Ryan suddenly froze. "Did you see that?" he whispered, pointing toward the second floor. Emily followed his gaze. The windows of room 209 faced the courtyard. For just a second, she thought she saw someone standing there, a tall figure, motionless, watching them. "Probably just the janitor," she muttered, though her voice lacked confidence. But when they left through the main doors, the janitor's truck was nowhere in sight. The building was supposed to be empty. The next day, Ryan couldn't shake off what he'd seen. After school, he convinced Emily to sneak up to room 209 with him. The hallway was dim, the air heavy with dust. The door to the classroom had been locked for years, but the small window on the door was still intact. Ryan cupped his hands against the glass and peered inside. At first, he saw only overturned desks and broken chairs, but then, something moved in the far corner. A shadow shifted, tall and thin, as if it were standing upright. "Do you see that?" Ryan asked, stepping aside so Emily could look. She pressed her face to the glass, and her breath caught in her throat. The figure was there, unmistakable. It didn't move closer, but its head tilted slowly, as though acknowledging them. Emily pulled back instantly. "No, we're not doing this." They hurried down the hall, but the feeling of being watched never left. When they finally reached the exit, Ryan glanced back. The figure was no longer in the classroom. Instead, it stood in the hallway window, closer than before. That night, Ryan couldn't sleep. He tossed and turned, images of the shadow replaying in his mind. Around 2 a.m., his phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. "I saw you." His stomach dropped. He wanted to believe it was a prank, but when he showed Emily the message the next day, her face went pale. "Ryan," she whispered, "look." On his phone screen, under the message, was a photo. It was blurry, but clear enough to recognize. It showed Ryan's bedroom window, taken from the outside, and in the reflection of the glass, a tall shadow was leaning over his bed. At Westford High, lockers slammed shut and opened all day long, but there was one in particular that no student dared to use, Locker 313. It looked the same as all the others, scratched metal, faded paint, a number stenciled in black, but everyone knew something was wrong with it. Teachers dismissed the rumors, of course. "It's just broken," they said. But the students told a different story. Years earlier, a boy had gone missing, last seen by his friends heading to his locker. His body was never found, and not long after, strange things began happening. No matter how many times the janitors welded it shut, Locker 313 would always swing open again overnight. Books inside would appear soaked even if they'd been bone dry the day before, and sometimes kids swore they heard scratching from inside when the hallways were empty. For the longest time, no one dared get close. Until James, a junior who prided himself on not believing in ghost stories, decided to prove everyone wrong. One afternoon, he waited until the halls were quiet and walked up to Locker 313. The air felt colder there, as if the old vents above were blowing directly on him, though they weren't. He tugged on the handle, and to his surprise, the locker opened easily. At first, it was empty, just shadows and rust. But then James noticed something scratched deep into the metal on the back wall. Words, carved as if by fingernails. "Let me out." His stomach dropped. He leaned closer to see if it was just graffiti. That's when he heard it, a faint, hollow tapping from inside the locker wall. "Hello?" he whispered, his voice shaking despite himself. The tapping stopped. For a long moment, there was silence, and then, slowly, 3 knocks came back. James staggered away, his pulse racing. The locker door began to creak shut on its own, metal groaning. He turned to leave, but the door slammed so violently it echoed down the hall. Panicked, he ran. When he glanced back, the locker was standing wide open again, and inside, resting on the shelf, was something new. A torn piece of notebook paper, edges yellowed with age. Written across it in shaky handwriting were the words, "You found me." The next morning, James tried to tell his friends, but they laughed it off. When he went back to prove it, locker 313 was locked tight, sealed with a brand new padlock. But that night, James woke up to a metallic clanging. At first, he thought it was a dream. Then he realized it was coming from downstairs, from his own house. When he crept to the kitchen, he froze. His family didn't even have a locker. But there, against the wall, stood locker 313. The padlock was gone, and the door was slowly swinging open.